Cadia was dying. The fortress world that had stood for 10,000 years was finally breaking. Reality itself was tearing apart as the Eye of Terror pushed against the barrier that had held it back for so long. The sky burned with colors that should not exist. The ground shook with impacts that came from nowhere and everywhere, but Davin Cole had no time to think about the end of the world. He had something more immediate to survive. The demon that had been Jorik filled the relay station with its presence. It was not just a creature. It was wrongness given form. Looking at it made Davin's eyes water and his brain ache. Its many mouths spoke constantly, whispering secrets that tried to worm their way into his mind. Lost fire hit it and did nothing. Bolter rounds hit it and did nothing. It walked through the soldiers like they were made of paper, its impossible limbs tearing through flesh and armor with equal ease. Harkin charged it with a chains word he had taken from a dead officer. The veteran fought like a man possessed, every swing precise, every movement born from decades of combat experience. For a moment, Davin thought he might actually hurt it, then the demon caught the chains word in one of its mouths. It bit down. Metal screamed and shattered. And before Harkin could react, another limb punched through his chest, lifting him off the ground like a puppet. Old man, the demon said through 100 voices. You have fought for so long. Seen so much. Lost so much. Let me show you what waits for you at the end. Harkin's screams lasted longer than they should have. Long after a human body should have died, his voice continued, growing higher and stranger until it did not sound human anymore. Mira grabbed Davin's arm and pulled him back. Run. We need to run, but there was nowhere to run. The demon had sealed the doors. Outside, enemy forces were converging on their position, drawn by the false coordinates that had been broadcast. They were trapped between a monster inside and an army outside. Mira closed her eyes. Her lips began to move. The words her grandmother had taught her flowed out in a stream that seemed to glow in the air. Ancient words. Forbidden words. Words that had no place in this reality. The demon stopped, its many mouths fell silent for the first time. Its impossible body went rigid. And where Myra's words touched it, its flesh began to burn. Little heretic, it hissed. Where did you learn those words? Mira did not answer. She kept speaking, her voice growing stronger, the words coming faster. Light began to emanate from her skin. Not the harsh light of lost fire or plasma. Something older. Something pure, the demon screamed. Actually screamed, in pain, in fear, in rage. It tried to move toward her, but the words held it back. Its flesh was burning away now, revealing something worse underneath. Something that looked at Davin and made him understand that death was not the worst thing that could happen to a person, but the light was consuming Mira too. Davin could see it eating away at her, burning her from the inside out. The forbidden words were not meant for human throats. They were not meant for mortal vessels. Using them was destroying her. Mira, stop. You are killing yourself. She looked at him. Her eyes were already half gone, replaced by that terrible light. Her smile was peaceful. Go to the Vox, she said. Her voice was somehow calm despite the flames eating her alive. Tell command. Tell them the coordinates are wrong. Save the others. And then she poured everything she had left into one final word. The demon exploded. There was no other way to describe it. One moment it existed, and the next it was gone, scattered across reality like ashes in the wind. Mira fell with it, her body collapsing into itself, the light fading, the warmth disappearing. By the time Davin reached her, there was nothing left but empty clothes and a faint smell of incense that he did not have time to mourn. The enemy was coming. He could hear them outside, thousands of voices screaming for blood. But he could also reach the Vox now. The demon was gone. The doors were open. Davin ran. He broadcast warnings until enemy fire destroyed the equipment. He screamed coordinates and corrections into the static, not knowing if anyone heard, not knowing if it mattered. Lost beams and bolter rounds tore through the walls around him. The building was coming apart. When Imperial reinforcements finally arrived, they found Davin Cole crawling through the wreckage, the only survivor of Relay Station Epsilon 7. Around him lay the bodies of 31 soldiers and the empty clothes of a former scribe who had saved them all. The reinforcements were not regular guardsmen, they wore gray armor marked with symbols Davin did not recognize. They moved with purpose that went beyond military discipline. And they looked at him with eyes that held no compassion, only calculation. Inquisition, one of them said. Ordo Malleus. You will come with us. They questioned him for 12 hours. What had he seen? What had he heard? What had Mira said? What words had she used? He told them everything. He had nothing left to hide. Nothing left to protect. When it was over, a woman in robes approached him. She was old, her face lined with scars that seemed to glow faintly in certain light. You have been exposed to demonic influence, she said. You have witnessed forbidden rites. By imperial law, you should be executed. Davin said nothing. He felt nothing. Death seemed like a mercy at this point, but you also survived, the woman continued. You resisted corruption. You tried to warn your allies, even when all was lost. That suggests either great faith or great stubbornness. Perhaps both. She offered him a choice. Death, clean and quick, his soul consigned to the Emperor's light. Or service, in a capacity he could never refuse, hunting the things that hid among humanity. Fighting an eternal war that the common people would never know existed. Davin thought of his father. Of Harkon. Of Jorik, who had been kind before the demon took him. Of Mira, who had burned herself out of existence to save people she barely knew. That I will serve, he said. The Inquisitor nodded. She did not smile. People in her line of work never smiled. Behind them, through the window of the black ship that would carry him away, Cadia burned. The fortress world was breaking apart, its centuries of defiance finally ending. Millions died as the planet tore itself apart. Davin watched it all. The beginning of a new darkness. The end of an age, and he understood at last why the Emperor's servants never smiled. There was nothing left to smile about, only war. Only duty. Only the endless fight against enemies that wore familiar faces. That he had been forced into this life. Drafted against his will. Broken and rebuilt into something harder, colder, emptier, but he had survived, and in the grim darkness of the far future, sometimes survival was the only victory possible. Paranoia spread through the regiment like a disease. Every soldier watched their comrades with suspicious eyes. Who spoke strange words in their sleep? Whose eyes flickered with unnatural light when they thought no one was looking? Who smiled at moments when smiling made no sense? The commissars noticed the tension. They blamed weakness. They blamed cowardice. And they dealt with it the only way they knew how. 3 soldiers were executed on suspicion alone. No evidence. No trial. Just a bolt pistol to the head and a body dragged into the mud. The killings continued anyway. Another guardsman found dead in his bunk, his face frozen in terror. A sergeant discovered in a supply closet, his throat torn out from the inside. A medici who had been treating the wounded, now lying among them, her eyes burned out of her skull. Whatever was hiding among them, it was not afraid. It was playing with them. Davin's squad received orders to hold Relay Station Epsilon 7. It was a small building on a hill overlooking a valley that led directly to Cadia's main fortress. The station controlled artillery coordinates for 3 sectors. If it fell, thousands of guns would go silent, and the enemy would pour through the gap. They fortified the position as best they could. Sandbags. Razor wire. Heavy weapons mounted at every window. 32 soldiers from the Arcturus 47th, all that remained of a regiment that had numbered thousands just weeks before. The attacks came in waves. First, the cultists. Mad humans who had given their souls to chaos, screaming praise to dark gods as they charged up the hill. They died in hundreds, their bodies torn apart by lost fire and heavy bolter rounds. But they kept coming. Always more. Always screaming. Then the mutants. Twisted creatures that had once been human but were now something else entirely. Extra limbs. Mouths where mouths should not be. Eyes that glowed with inner fire. They were harder to kill. They did not stop when they should have stopped. Some kept fighting even after losing limbs, crawling through the mud with their remaining hands, still trying to reach the Imperial lines. Then worse things came. Things that Davin did not have words for. Shadows that moved independently of light. Shapes that hurt to look at directly. Sounds that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Through it all, the squad held. They fought through day and night, through ammunition shortages and water running low, through wounds and exhaustion and the constant screaming of the dying. During a brief lull in the fighting, Mira pulled Davin aside. Her face was pale, her hands shaking, but her eyes held a strange calm. "That I need to tell you something," she said. "The prayers I speak. They are not from any approved Imperial text." Davin felt cold spread through his stomach. "What do you mean? My grandmother taught them to me when I was a child. She said they were older than the Imperium. Older than anything. Words that push back the darkness, that is heresy," Davin whispered. "If the commissars find out, I know." Mira looked at him without fear. "But I have watched those prayers burn cultists. I have seen them make demons flinch. Whatever they are, they work. And right now, we need everything that works." Davin should have reported her. He knew that. The punishment for heresy was death. But he had also seen men die despite following every rule, every prayer, every proper procedure. The Emperor had not protected them. "Teach me," he said. "That I in the darkness of Relay Station Epsilon 7, surrounded by the sounds of distant battle and the moans of wounded soldiers." Mira taught Davin words that had no place in Imperial doctrine. Words that felt strange on his tongue but warm in his chest. Words that might save them or damn them, depending on who was watching. Then Jorik began to change. It started small. A laugh at the wrong moment. A smile that lasted too long. The big man from the agri-world, who had cried every night on the troopship, now seemed to enjoy the killing. He volunteered for every dangerous mission. He took trophies from the enemy dead. And sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, his eyes flickered with something that was not human. Davin confronted him in the ammunition storage room. "Jorik, we need to talk about what is happening to you." Jorik turned slowly. His movements were wrong. Too smooth. Too controlled. Like something was wearing his body and had not quite figured out how it worked. "What do you mean, friend Davin?" His voice was Jorik's, but there was something underneath it. Something that harmonized with itself in ways human voices should not. "You are not yourself." "Something is wrong," Jorik smiled. It was not a human smile. It was too wide, showed too many teeth, reached too high on his face. "Nothing is wrong, little mortal. Everything is exactly as it should be." The big man stepped closer, and Davin saw that his shadow was wrong too. It had too many arms. It was bigger than Jorik's body. It moved when he stood still. Davin raised his Loss rifle, but Jorik was faster. One massive hand closed around the barrel, crushing it like paper. "I have been watching you," the thing that wore Jorik said. "All of you. So much fear. So much pain. So much delicious despair." It leaned close, and Davin smelled something wrong on its breath. Something like burning meat and rotting flowers. "I know things about you, Davin Cole. I know about your father. I know he did not die when the arbitrators took you. I know he screamed your name as the ship left. I know he is still screaming, even now, in a place where screaming never stops." The door burst open. Harkin stood there with Mira and 3 other soldiers, all with weapons raised. The thing that was Jorik turned to face them. Its smile grew wider. Its eyes began to glow. "Ah, the veteran. The heretic. And the lambs who follow them. How wonderful." The creature spread its arms, and its body began to change. Skin split. Bones cracked. Something inside started pushing its way out. "I was going to wait longer. Play with you more. But I suppose the game can end now." The demon emerged from Jorik like a butterfly from a cocoon, but there was nothing beautiful about it. It was tall and thin, made of angles that should not exist and colors that had no names. Where its face should have been, there were only mouths. Dozens of mouths. All speaking different words and languages that predated humanity, and in the chaos that followed, as the soldiers opened fire and the demon laughed, the relay station's vox crackled to life. Someone was using it, someone was transmitting their coordinates. To the enemy. The dropship hit the ground hard enough to crack bones. Davin tasted blood in his mouth as the ramp slammed open and Drill Abbott screamed at them to move. He ran without thinking, his boots hitting Cadian soil for the first time, his eyes struggling to process what he was seeing. The world was dying. That was his first thought. The sky was wrong, streaked with purple lightning and the distant glow of the Eye of Terror. The ground was churned mud mixed with blood and the pieces of men who had stood here hours before. Ahead, massive fortress walls stretched toward the horizon, and beyond them, the flash and thunder of weapons too large for Davin to imagine, the 13th Black Crusade. Abaddon the Despoiler had come to tear down everything humanity had built. And 12,000 fresh bodies from Arcturus Prime were here to stop him, the Arcturus 47th, they were called now. A regiment that had not existed a month ago, made from workers who had never held weapons before the tithe ships came. They were assigned to Sector Kappa 9, where the defensive lines had broken twice in the last week. Their orders were simple. Hold the position. Do not retreat. The Emperor protects. Their first engagement came within 3 hours of landing. Davin was helping to reinforce a trench when the screaming started. Not human screaming. Something worse. Something that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. Then the enemy came over the ridge, and he understood what true horror looked like. Traitor guardsmen. Humans who had turned from the Emperor's light and embraced the dark powers of chaos. They wore corrupted versions of Imperial uniforms, their armor covered in strange symbols that hurt to look at. Their eyes glowed with unnatural light. Their mouths twisted in expressions of mad joy as they charged toward the Imperial lines. Open fire, Harkin bellowed. Make them pay for every step. Davin raised his Loss rifle and pulled the trigger. The weapon kicked against his shoulder. A beam of red light lanced out and struck a charging traitor in the chest. The man fell, but 2 more took his place. Then 10 more. Then 100 more. Combat was nothing like training. Training was organized, controlled, predictable. This was pure chaos. Noise so loud it became silence. Confusion so total that Davin could not tell which direction was forward. The wet sounds of bodies coming apart all around him as Loss fire and bullets and worse things tore through human flesh that he fired until his power pack died. When his Loss rifle clicked empty, he used it as a club, smashing it into the face of a traitor who had jumped into the trench. The man went down. Davin grabbed another power pack from a dead guardsman beside him and kept firing. Time lost meaning. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like seconds. At some point, Mira appeared beside him, her own rifle blazing. She shot a traitor who was about to put a knife in Davin's back. He did not have time to thank her. He just kept fighting. Jorik was somewhere to the left, holding a breach in the trench wall by himself. The big man had found a heavy stubber, a massive machine gun that tore through the enemy ranks like a scythe through wheat. Bodies piled up in front of him, but still they came. Still they kept coming. The sun set. Or maybe it rose. Davin could not tell anymore. All he knew was that he was still alive, still pulling the trigger, still watching people die on both sides. When Imperial reinforcements finally arrived, the Arcturus 47th had lost 3/4 of its strength. The trenches were filled with the dead. The mud was more red than brown. And Davin Cole stood among the survivors, covered in blood that was not his own, his hands shaking too violently to reload his weapon. That he had survived his first battle. He did not feel proud. He did not feel relieved. He felt nothing at all, and that scared him more than the enemy had. That night, as the Medicae dragged away the wounded and the dead, Davin saw something that broke what little hope he had left. A figure in the distance, walking through the battlefield as if taking a stroll through a garden. A Chaos Space Marine. A traitor Astartes. 8 feet tall, clad in armor that had once been noble but was now covered in spikes and dark symbols. The creature carried a massive chain axe that dripped with fresh blood. It moved through the wounded Imperial soldiers, killing them one by one, not rushing, not hurrying. Just harvesting that. No one tried to stop it. What could normal men do against such a monster? Davin watched the Space Marine kill 17 wounded guardsmen before it finally walked back toward its own lines. 17 souls, snuffed out like candles in a storm. And the creature had not even seemed to notice them as threats. Harkin found him an hour later, still staring at the spot where the massacre had happened. Now you understand, the veteran said. His voice was flat, empty. We are not warriors to them. We are not enemies. We are currency. Bodies to be spent. The Imperium spends us against the forces of chaos, and chaos spends us against the Imperium. And neither side will ever run out of coins, Davin wanted to argue. He wanted to believe there was meaning in this. Purpose. Something worth dying for, but he had seen the Chaos Space Marine's face as it killed. He had seen the complete indifference. And he knew Harkin was right. Then the sergeant delivered worse news. Command had volunteered the remains of the Arcturus 47th for a special mission. A relay station that needed defending. Coordinates that needed protecting, and there was something else. Something that made Harkin's voice drop to barely a whisper, the thing from the ship, he said. The demon that killed Vec. It came down with us. It is still here, still hiding among the regiment, still wearing a human face. And until we find it, none of us are safe. Davin looked at the soldiers around him. His brothers in arms. His comrades. One of them was a monster, and he had no idea which one. The troopship Righteous Fury was a floating prison. 12,000 conscripts packed into cargo holds that smelled of sweat, fear, and engine oil. Davin spent his first 3 days in a corner, knees pulled to his chest, watching the others and trusting no one. Some men prayed. Some men cried. Some men sat in silence, their eyes already dead though their bodies still breathed. On the 4th day, the training began. Drill abbots in brown robes woke them with shock staves and screaming. They had 4 hours to learn how to hold a loss rifle. 4 hours to learn how to stand in formation. 4 hours to learn that their lives meant nothing, and only the mission mattered. Davin learned something else too. He learned that hesitation earned pain. Questions earned worse. A boy from the southern hives asked why they were fighting. The drill abbot beat him until his jaw broke. Another conscript complained about the food. A commissar shot him in the head while everyone watched. The body was dragged away. Training continued. Davin kept his mouth shut. He watched. He listened. He survived. In the sleeping hold, he found others like himself. Mira was a former scribe from a shrine world, small and thin with eyes that seemed too old for her young face. She muttered prayers under her breath, strange words that Davin did not recognize from any Imperial hymn. Jorik was her opposite, a massive man from an agri world with hands like shovels and a gentle voice. He cried every night when he thought no one was listening. And then there was Sergeant Harkin, a veteran of 12 campaigns who had been assigned to shape the new recruits into something useful. Harkin was different from the drill abbots. He did not beat them for mistakes. He did not scream for the pleasure of screaming. Instead, he taught them how to stay alive. Where to aim. When to take cover. How to breathe when fear tried to close your throat. One night, Davin asked him why he bothered. The others did not seem to care if they lived or died. Harkin looked at him with eyes that held nothing but tired acceptance. Because someone taught me, he said. And I survived long enough to teach you. That is all any of us can do. Pass on what we know and hope it matters. Davin wanted to believe him. He wanted to believe that survival was possible. But every day, more conscripts died in training. Live fire exercises with real ammunition. Combat drills where exhaustion killed as surely as bullets. The weak fell. The slow fell. The unlucky fell. And the righteous fury continued its journey toward a destination no one would name. Then the strange things began. It started small. Equipment malfunctions that could not be explained. Vox units that whispered static in patterns that almost sounded like words. Shadows in the lower decks that moved wrong, stretched wrong, existed wrong. Soldiers reported nightmares so vivid they woke up screaming. 3 men in Hold 7 killed themselves in a single night, all using the exact same method, all leaving the exact same message carved into their bunks that he sees us. The commissars blamed stress. The drill abbots blamed weakness. But Davin saw how they avoided the lower decks now. He saw how even the veterans walked faster through certain corridors, and then Guardsman Vec was found dead. That he was lying in a maintenance corridor, his lost rifle still in his hands, his eyes open and staring at nothing. The medici said his heart had simply stopped. No wounds. No poison. No explanation. But Davin saw his face before they covered it. Vec had not died peacefully. His expression was frozen in pure terror, his mouth open in a scream that would never come. That he saw something, Mira whispered that night. Something that scared him to death. Jorik shook his head. That is not possible. Fear cannot kill a man. That it can, Harkin said. He had appeared from nowhere, his voice low and careful. He sat with them in the shadows, away from the others. I have seen it before. On ships that travel through the warp. Sometimes things get in. Things that are not human. Things that should not exist. Davin felt cold spread through his chest. What kind of things? Harkin did not answer immediately. He looked at each of them in turn, measuring them, deciding if they could handle the truth. Demons, he finally said. Creatures from the warp. They feed on fear, on anger, on everything dark inside us. And they are very, very patient. The ship shuddered. Alarms began to wail. Red lights flooded the hold as a voice crackled over the Vox system, all personnel to stations. Translation complete. We have arrived. Davin rushed to the nearest viewport with the others. What he saw stole the breath from his lungs. The sky was on fire. Not with clouds or sunset, but with actual flames that burned without fuel, without logic, without end. A great wound in reality itself, purple and red in colors that had no names, swirling like a whirlpool that could swallow worlds. The Eye of Terror. He had heard stories, but stories were nothing compared to seeing it, and below them, a planet. A fortress world covered in trenches and walls and the scars of endless war. Cadia, Harkin said. His voice was hollow. The gate that holds back hell. Jorik made a strange sound in his throat. And we are going down there. No one answered. No one needed to. The troopship began its descent, and Davin Cole realized that everything before this moment had been preparation. The real nightmare was just beginning. Through the viewport, he could see the flashes of battle on the surface below. Millions of lights, millions of deaths, millions of souls being spent in a war that had lasted for 10,000 years, and now he was one of them. Davin Cole had never seen the sky. He was born in Hive World Arcturus Prime, deep in Sector Gamma 12, where the ceiling was made of metal and the air tasted like rust. For 16 years, he worked beside his father in the manufactorum. They built parts for Loss rifles. Davin had never fired one. He had never even held a complete weapon. He just made the pieces, day after day, and dreamed of nothing because dreaming was a luxury poor workers could not afford. His father, Marcus, was a quiet man with rough hands and tired eyes. He never spoke of the Imperium or the wars that burned across the galaxy. He only said one thing about the outside world. He said that ignorance was safety, and safety was the only gift a father could give. Davin believed him. He believed that if he kept his head down and worked hard, the darkness beyond the hive would never touch him. That he was wrong. The black ships came on a day like any other. Davin was fitting a power coil into its housing when the alarm started. Not the fire alarms or the shift change bells. These were different. These were the kind of alarms that made old workers stop and stare at nothing, their faces turning pale. His father grabbed his arm. Hard. His fingers dug into Davin's flesh like claws. they are here, Marcus said. His voice was barely a whisper. The tithe ships. They have come for their payment, Davin did not understand. What payment? They paid their taxes. They gave their production quotas. What more could the Imperium want? Bodies, his father said. They want bodies. The administrative officers came first. They wore black robes and carried data slates that glowed with names and numbers. Behind them marched the arbitrators, the enforcers of imperial law, their armor thick and their shock mauls crackling with energy. And behind them walked figures in long coats with bolt pistols at their hips. Commissars. Davin had heard stories about commissars. They were the men who killed soldiers for cowardice. They were the men who made sure the emperor's armies kept fighting, even when fighting meant certain death. The lead commissar had a face like carved stone. No emotion. No mercy. He read from a scroll in a voice that echoed through the Manufactorum. By order of the Departamento Munitorum, this sector will provide 3,000 able bodies for service in the Astra Militarum. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance is heresy. The Emperor protects. Then the selection began. Arbitrators moved through the workers like wolves through sheep. They checked ages, checked health, checked nothing that mattered. A young man was dragged away while his mother screamed. An old worker who tried to protect his son was beaten to the ground. Blood splattered across the manufactorum floor, mixing with the oil and grime that had always been there. Davin froze. His legs would not move. His mind would not think. He just stood there, watching the horror unfold, until his father shook him. The ventilation shaft, Marcus said. Go. Now. Hide until the ships leave. Father, I cannot leave you. Marcus pushed him hard. His eyes were wet, but his voice was firm. You are all I have left of your mother. You will survive. You will live. Now go, Davin. Go and do not look back. Davin ran. He did not look back. He heard his father shout something, heard the crack of a shock maul, heard a body fall. But he did not look back. He could not. The ventilation shaft was narrow and dark. Davin crawled through it, his hands scraping against rusted metal, his breath loud in his ears. He crawled for what felt like hours, moving deeper into the hive's forgotten places. Maintenance tunnels. Refuse passages. Sections that had not seen workers in decades. That he thought he was safe. He thought he had escaped. For 6 hours, he hid in a collapsed section of the lower hive. He listened to the distant sounds of boots and screams and engines. He prayed to the Emperor, though he had never been a religious boy. He promised anything, everything, if only he could survive, but the hive was sealed. Every exit was blocked. Every tunnel was watched. The Imperium did not accept failure. The tithe would be filled, no matter the cost. They found him near the water recycling plant. 3 arbitrators with hunting servitors, half-machine creatures that tracked by scent and sound. Davin tried to run, but there was nowhere left to go. They beat him until he stopped struggling. They dragged him through corridors filled with other captured workers, all of them bleeding, all of them broken, all of them destined for war. The commissar was waiting at the transport carrier. The same one with the stone face. He looked down at Davin's bruised form and smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had seen this scene 1,000 times before. Welcome to the Imperial Guard, he said. Your life now belongs to the Emperor. They threw Davin into the carrier with hundreds of others. The doors sealed. The engines roared. And slowly, impossibly, the carrier lifted off. Davin pressed his face against a grimy viewport. He watched Hive World Arcturus Prime grow smaller and smaller. He watched the only home he had ever known fade into the blackness of space. He thought of his father lying on the manufactorum floor. He thought of the life he would never have, and as the stars swallowed him whole, Davin Cole understood that he was no longer a person, that he was a number. A resource. A body to be spent in wars he did not understand, against enemies he had never seen. For an emperor who would never know his name, the tithe had been paid.